Welcome to the Born Wild podcast. This space is for birth workers, parents, and families. Anyone drawn to a more honest, intuitive way of living, birthing, and growing. Here we have real conversations, learn through reflection and community, and make room to explore without judgment. Because at the end of the day, we are all born wild. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Born Wild podcast. I'm your host, Sophia Henderson, and Ava, my student, is with me today. And we are interviewing Liz, who I'll invite to introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Liz Eidelman. I am a mom of two and a Doula birth doula located in New Jersey. I'm really excited to be on the show today. I have two unique birth stories that catapulted me into birth work, so I feel like we'll have lots to talk about, and I'm excited to be here.
I know I'm trying to wrap my brain around exactly how we connected because you commented on a post of mine and then I asked you a question or you private messaged me. And then I found out that you had a similar story to a client that I had just supported. I was like, whoa, the similarities. I think you have the same name.
Oh,
We
so
are like-
funny.
So
I believe I heard you speaking on another podcast. Maybe it was the Down to Birth about your experiences, your son, I think.
Yeah. Yes. That's
Yes,
right.
your son, my daughter, very similar
Yeah.
conditions.
Well, let's start at the very beginning of where your story starts. For some, it's before they had children. For others, it's when they had their first child. Your story into motherhood and also becoming a doula, depending on how that overlapped.
Yeah, I became pregnant in 2018 with my first child. She was born ultimately in March of 2019. And much like many first-time moms, I was not prepared at all. I didn't really feel the need to be prepared. I was birthing in the hospital that was closest to my house for convenience because everyone thinks that their baby's just going to fly out in the car. So I stuck with the OB that I had been going to since I was a teenager. And it was a large rotating group. And the further I got along in my pregnancy, there were some, in hindsight, signs that something wasn't right. Around 28 weeks gestation, I thought I was having contractions. I was in a lot of pain. And it turned out that I had excess amniotic fluid. So I had polyhydramnios. And then fell a series of ultrasounds and just constant follow-up on this high level of fluid. I didn't have gestational diabetes. Nothing visually appeared wrong with the baby on ultrasound.
And sorry, just to pause you, you mentioned that because it can correlate with polyhydramnios. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. So they were trying to see if there was a reason for the excess fluid. Yeah.
Exactly. So I had an ultrasound every week from 28 to, I want to say, 36 weeks.
Wow.
And we just, at the end of the day, we weren't really sure why I had this high level of fluid, but I was uncomfortable. And by 39 and change, I was ready for this baby to come out. So not knowing what I know now, not knowing anything at all, I took myself to labor and delivery. And they said, well, you're only like 2 centimeters, but we're going to keep you. We're going to keep you anyway. And so that's what they did. They kept me and unfolded a whole cascade of interventions. I had a first birth story that all encompassing was wild and crazy. But if we just isolate the birth portion was enough to land me where I am now. So I put everything in their hands. I got an epidural fairly early. They broke my water. I pushed for 3 hours. I had an episiotomy, a vacuum extraction, literally anything and everything you could think of. And I felt so detached from my body and from the experience. And then my baby's born. And they put my baby on my chest. And she starts regurgitating so much amniotic fluid. She just seemed like so junky. And having never done this before, I had asked, is this normal? She's throwing up. And luckily, the NICU team was in the room because I had had the vacuum. And one of the NICU nurses looked at the baby and she was like, you had poly. And she's like putting 2 and 2 together. And she's like, I think we need to take your baby to be evaluated. So they take her to the NICU. We don't know what's going on. We don't know what they're evaluating her for. We don't know if she's okay. So it was like a complete separation of mom and baby. And I remember before she was taken to the NICU, she was on the warmer all the way across the room. And no one offered to have her at least skin to skin with me during that time while we were waiting. I just thought, okay, something's wrong, so I'm just going to wait. And in hindsight, I realized how detrimental that probably was to our collective experience, both her and I. So they wheel us down to the NICU after her testing was done, and the nurse parks my wheelchair, and she looks at the other nurse in the NICU, and I'll never forget, she just said, "They don't know." And I was like, what don't we know? Does someone want to just tell me what's going on? So it turns out that my daughter has esophageal atresia with a tracheoesophageal fistula. So part of the VACTERL anomalies of birth defects that could happen. I think, Sophia, your son has a few of them, if I'm remembering.
Yeah, and on the list of people to interview is my husband. We're actually going to chat together and share our birth story, but we haven't done it in full on this podcast yet. But yeah, he has VACTERL.
Yeah. That's kind of how you came on my radar, and I was like, wow, what a different experience to have, to be a home birth midwife and to come at this from such a different vantage point.
Well, I had never heard of it before when I had my son. Yeah. And so just to say for people listening, VACTERL is an association that is hard to diagnose because it can look different in every child. It's not like X equals VACTERL. It's acronyms that stand for all the areas of the body that can have birth defects. So V is vertebrae, A is anal, C is cardiac, E is esophageal, T is tracheal, which I just found out recently, they consider those one together, like E and T, which I thought they were separate. But R is renal and L is limb deformities. And you're considered VACTERL if you have at least 3 of them. And they can show up either very mild or life-threatening. And yeah, some babies usually need a lot of surgeries to correct them. And it's almost like they're scrambled on the inside.
I often say she has like an invisible disability, or like a disability that you can't see with the naked eye.
Yeah.
And you explained it perfectly. But my daughter has the T and the E. And for a while, we thought she had the C as well, which was cardiac, as you said, because she did have some teeny tiny holes in her heart when she was born. But the way that was ruled out was that they all closed on their own. And they explained to us that not every newborn baby has an echo done. So for all we know, minor VSDs at birth, especially below 40 weeks gestation, could be a thing that happens.
It can be way more common than we realize. Yeah.
Correct. So she's 7 now, and she is not considered to be VACTERL as far as we know. She just has the tracheoesophageal, the TE. So we found that out, and she was transferred ultimately to a hospital with a higher level NICU, and she spent about a month there. She had her corrective surgery and had to heal and then learn how to eat by mouth.
Pause you real quick, because you're postpartum. Were you able to go with her?
So my baby went with my husband. He followed her. And then my mother stayed with me. And luckily, by the grace of God, I had a vaginal birth. By the skin of my teeth. And so I signed the AMA against medical advice papers 7 hours later. They said, please just give us a couple of hours and one more round of blood work just to make sure you're doing okay, and then you can go. So that's what I did. I took a couple of hours, I hung back, and then I charged into the NICU on 2 feet. They kept offering me a wheelchair. I was like, good, get me to my child. So I ended up there with her, and I was able to stay with her. But at this point, I was discharged. So postpartum, I was completely fending for myself. I had no real postpartum care whatsoever.
Yeah. That was different for me because Ben was born at home and I had midwifery care. And so they were coming to the hospital to check on me, which was so nice because everyone's so focused on baby. It was nice to have somebody thinking about me.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember my daughter was in surgery on day 2 of life to correct her birth defect. And we had gone to the diner across the street from the hospital. And obviously, I still very much looked pregnant. And I remember someone was like, oh, any day now. And I was just gutted because little do they know my baby was born yesterday. She's in the OR right now. So it's the hardest thing, as you know, having to kind of give your baby over to a team and trust that. Especially after I feel that during the birth experience, so much of that trust had been broken. And I never really fully understood how I felt in that labor and delivery experience prior to the diagnosis until I got pregnant a second time. And I like,
you were saying, a lot of trust was broken, but some women can walk away feeling saved and that birth is inherently dangerous, but you didn't feel that way. Or did you feel that initially?
Initially, nothing was about me.
Yeah.
So I don't think I thought about my birth experience until I got pregnant a second time. Yeah. And when I got pregnant a second time, 2 years later, the first thing I did when I had a positive pregnancy test was I looked up doulas, I looked up midwives. And before I even told my husband, I had the faintest line on a home pregnancy test and I was Googling. And that was all I needed to know to be like, oh, wait a minute, you want a different experience. And the diagnosis and the NICU stay had nothing to do with the experience.
Yeah.
So that was like the humongous light bulb moment for me. And then the irony of that is that I was so strongly and heavily conditioned into the medical model and into this is just what people do, that it took me until I was almost 30 weeks in that pregnancy to transfer my care into the hands of midwives.
Yeah, was there like a final straw or were there little things over time that finally pushed you?
Yeah, there was absolutely a final straw. I was again with a rotating group of OBs within the same umbrella, corporate umbrella, different location because I had moved, but same model of care, which is no model of care. It's an assembly line. It's a factory. It's a baby factory.
But in your mind, your doula would protect you. Is that kind of what you were thinking?
Yeah. So let me backtrack and tell you the story of the doula.
Yeah.
So I think that this is like fate. I was on the playground and I was trying to branch out and meet moms. And I met up with a local moms group. And there was one woman there that I started chatting with. And I said, oh, what do you do? And she's like, well, I was in corporate, but I recently became a doula. And I was like,
a funny crowd number.
I was like, are you kidding? Tell me everything. And this was before I was pregnant. This was when my daughter was a toddler.
Okay.
And so I knew that she was a doula and I knew what she did and I knew how she got there. And when I found out I was pregnant, I instantly called her and I said, will you be my doula? And she was like, well, I'm actually also pregnant and I'm due like 3 weeks before you.
Oh, no.
So she referred me to a doula who was like her mentor. And I had asked this doula if she would be willing to take me on in exchange for promotion, because at the time what I had been doing was I had been doing social media influencer marketing. And to this day, I still dabble in that a little bit simply because I've grown a platform for myself. So I don't want to see the platform just totally die off. But at the time, I was heavily working in influencer marketing. And I said, it would be really cool for people to know about doula work and to know what a doula is. So this doula who was extremely seasoned and whose rate was much higher than what I could afford at the time offered to barter with me. And I believed, okay, I hired this doula. She's going to protect me. I hired these midwives. They're going to protect me. I'm good. I don't need to do any work. I've already done the work. I've hired everyone I need to hire. Yeah. So you can probably guess how that went. Right? So I hired my doula around 20 weeks and her and I talked about changing into midwifery care. She finally convinced me. I ended up with a team of medical midwives. And at my anatomy scan, they had found a 2-vessel cord. So I had a single umbilical artery.
And so let me pause again, because I'm sure there were some nerves at that anatomy scan. Like, is my baby all their pieces where they're supposed to be? And
Yep.
did you have an anatomy scan with your daughter and that was not visualized?
So with my first daughter, she did not have a 2-vessel cord.
And they can't see that defect on ultrasound, or they missed that defect on ultrasound with your first
The
daughter?
cord?
Just in general, her anatomy, the fact that it doesn't
Yeah.
connect. And because some people think that if there's anything going on with my baby structurally, we would see it on an ultrasound, which isn't necessarily true.
Right. So the esophagus is made of soft tissue, so it's really hard to visualize, especially when the child has so EATEF, esophageal atresia, tracheoesophageal fistula. That's the acronym.
Mhm.
If you have the tracheoesophageal fistula, my understanding is that amniotic fluid, which is supposed to swallow, go through the stomach, filter out through the bladder, and it's just supposed to be like a constant filtration system in your belly. That's not happening, and the fluid is accumulating because the baby is trying to swallow, but they can't. But when the baby has the fistula attached to the trachea and they attempt a swallow, it's my understanding that somehow some fluid can make its way through to the stomach by way of aspiration. So my daughter, Indy, always had a small stomach bubble, which is why it wasn't like immediate red flag. And I have since met parents that have had in utero diagnoses, not because you could see the disconnect, but because there's no stomach visible at all on an ultrasound. And that usually means that they have a long gap esophageal atresia that does not have the abnormal connection to the trachea.
Our client also had a small gap and lots of ultrasounds, and nothing was ever found until the baby was born. Yeah.
Yeah. So Indy had a smaller gap. She was able to be corrected on day 2 of life. And that's more than likely why we didn't know what was going on with the fluid. But in hindsight, all that fluid was because she wasn't able to actually swallow it. So naturally, in my second pregnancy, at my second anatomy scan, for anything at all to come up, it totally sent me into a spiral.
Yeah. Before we continue with that too, I just thought of a question. I'm curious what your feeding relationship was like with your daughter, because I can imagine that being potentially a challenge, and families may be facing this diagnosis wondering, will I be able to breastfeed? What does that feeding relationship look like?
Yeah, great question. So for Indy, I never breastfed. I pumped for 3 weeks, and she received almost exclusively breast milk for the first 3 weeks through a feeding tube. And then when she was finally cleared for oral feeding, she needed to have her milk thickened because she continued to aspirate. So they said she's connected now, but she aspirates on thin liquid, and we don't know why. So we had to thicken. The choice was you could exclusively pump and thicken with an artificial gel mix that you buy on Amazon, or you could use formula and you're at least able to thicken with a rice cereal or an oat cereal, something like that. And to me, that felt better because I had been exclusively pumping for 3 weeks, and I was like, this is for the birds.
Yeah. I wonder why they didn't tell you that you could thicken your breast milk with the same rice formula or something like that. Like
They did. They explained that to me. So there's a protein in breast milk that breaks down the consistency of any kind of rice cereal or oat cereal. So the baby wouldn't actually be getting the proper thickness. So if it's supposed to be like honey consistency, it might break down to more of a nectar consistency, and so on and so forth.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay.
So I opted to formula feed her. After that, I was so traumatized. It felt like one of the only things I could control. So I did that. And that was our feeding relationship. Our feeding relationship was tricky because I don't feel like I missed out on any real bonding with her after she came home from the NICU, because there's so much that's taken away from you that it almost feels like once she's back in your bubble, that's all that matters. And so I felt very much like our bonding at that point, like, it's amazing how nature just makes up for itself.
Yeah.
That part was completely fine. Especially as a doula now, I have an interesting relationship too with breastfeeding, because this is a little bit of a spoiler alert, but I never have for either child.
Mm-hmm.
And meanwhile, I'm trained in lactation. I support women who are breastfeeding all the time. But I think my unique perspective was that I didn't feel any shortage of bonding based on how she was fed. And maybe that's because just the fact that she was able to be fed was enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you for going backwards in your timeline. I just feel like a baby that has esophageal surgery, like, that is an important topic.
Yeah. And it wasn't easy. When she came home from the NICU, she, a few weeks later, developed a stricture of the esophagus, which is where the scar tissue from the repair site thickens. And she strictured down to a pinhole at one point and wasn't even passing liquids through and was having blue spells and had to go back. It wasn't like, oh, good, she's repaired and that's it. You know, we had such a journey, even transitioning from bottles to solids. We did feeding therapy. We made sure that she was able to tolerate different consistencies. And ultimately, from, I would say, the age maybe 18 months to 3 years was the most challenging time for feeding, because you have a toddler that wants to put all the food in her mouth and wants to take these giant bites and isn't old enough to understand her body and her condition and her limitations. But I'm happy to say that after multiple episodes of stuck food and having to learn the whole learning curve of her eating, at age 7, her only food problem is that she's picky.
So she's totally normal.
Totally good. She uses a lot of water to push her food down because the surgical repair site, there's no nerve endings there. So as I'm sure you know from being a medical professional, the nerve endings are what push our food down. The esophagus is like a big muscle. So we're not relying on gravity, but Indy's relying on gravity. So she drinks a lot. And because of that, she pees a lot. But other than that, no restrictions, no consistency, no texture. There's nothing she cannot eat.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay, so now let's go back to your anatomy scan with your second daughter, which I'm sure you were on pins and needles. And maybe since it's already had been explained to you, also feeling like just because we don't see some things doesn't mean there isn't something.
That's literally it. Like, you took the words out of my mouth. I remember my husband, he's just so unbelievably rational. And I like to believe that 14 years together, 10 years of marriage, it's starting to finally rub off on me a little bit. He, at the anatomy scan, was like, they looked us in the eye and they told us there's nothing to be worried about. They told us this is a variation of normal. I'm not worried because look at what they said. Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, look at what they said last time. They told us week after week after week that everything seemed okay and that we were just fine to continue. And then we were blindsided with the biggest thing that's ever happened to either one of us. So, we just came at that from two different perspectives. But transitioning into midwifery care helped me exponentially. Once I got into the hands of midwives, they helped me to feel like it was a normal pregnancy and that I needed to not worry about my last pregnancy and just look at what was right in front of us. And the irony is that X amount of weeks went by, and at my 39-week appointment, I started getting the pressure to induce. And you had asked me before what was the last straw in switching to midwifery care, and I realized I didn't actually answer that. But at the OB, the last straw was after the anatomy scan came back, they started telling me I should just have a C-section. They were like, you should just schedule something. Honestly, you've been through enough. You don't need to go through all this again. It's a very controlled environment. You have this history. We just think it would be best for you and your baby if you had a C-section. And I was like, oh, Heck no.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the last straw for me. And the midwives were like, of course you don't need a C-section. No, you're totally good. And then my due date rolls around and they start pressuring me to induce. And when I say why, they're like, you have this 2-vessel cord. And for all we know, after the due date, the placenta could start to suffer because of the cord. And we don't want that to happen. So we think it would be best to have an induction.
And so just to clarify, when you switched from OB to midwives, it was still within the same hospital system?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. It wasn't like private midwives. Okay.
No, medical midwives in the same hospital. And that's another thing is that I chose this hospital. So I chose the hospital that my first daughter was transferred to.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I want to deliver there because what if this happens again?
Mm-hmm.
And now in my line of work, as you can probably understand, I receive so many messages from people saying, I just want to go to this hospital because just in case. They have a level 4 NICU just in case. And I have to tell people, after all that I've been through, I have to tell people, why do you think you're the just in case? Let's get into that. Let's figure out why you feel that of all the babies born all over the world, your baby's going to be the one that needs that level 4 NICU right then and there and won't get that transfer if they need it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I chose this hospital based on proximity, based on the NICU, based on just in case of it all. And I think I've learned since my daughter was born that I approached that birth with an underlying sense of fear. Mm-hmm. And my midwives approached that birth with the same fear because I had this scarlet letter on my chart from my previous experience. So fear is, in my opinion, what will kill a positive birth experience if there's any fear in the room. So this doula, it was COVID times. I had never met her in person. All of our interaction was virtual. All of our prenatals were virtual. And she was doing this as a barter for me. I didn't even pay her. My doula, when I told her they recommended induction, said, great. Call me when you're 5 centimeters. Another thing that now I do not carry into my practice because although there is a scope of care and a scope that we're not supposed to go outside of, I felt that in hindsight, it was to my extreme detriment to not have someone who was highly educated tell me, here are the reasons that are medically indicated for induction and yours doesn't fall under that category. Mm-hmm. I needed someone to give me that reality check. Even if it upset me at the time, in hindsight, I think I would have been grateful. Mm-hmm. So I showed up for my induction and I had this fear that I believe was not allowing my body to open and soften and to give my baby permission. I anesthetized myself almost immediately. I wanted to watch Dancing with the Stars. I didn't want to be in pain. The Foley was bothering me. I said, I'll take an epidural. Check out. That's what I did. I checked out. I said, peace. So had my epidural. I watched my show. I felt nothing. They broke my water the next morning. My baby dropped in an asynclitic presentation. About 12 hours later, I had a fever. Her heart rate was all over the place. And off to the operating room we went. After I had a vaginal birth the first time. And I remember in the operating room, I'm a Gemini. So I feel like I have the dual personality and the dual kind of perception of everything. In the operating room, I remember 2 things. I remember being pissed because this baby was totally healthy. She came out screaming. She was a pound heavier than her sister. They were showing everyone the cord. Oh, look at the cord. Look at how because it was 2 vessel, but the second vessel had overcompensated. So it was huge. So it was almost like it probably was a 3 vessel, but the 2 vessels fused. And so they're like showing off the cord and like, it's just this like happy-go-lucky environment. And I was annoyed because I was like, I can't believe I had a vaginal birth the first time. And here I am on the OR table and I'm like, my teeth are chattering and I'm having a panic attack and I feel like crap. And I just cannot believe that this is where this went when I hired the midwife and I hired the doula. And then the other half of me was so grateful because my midwife was in the OR with me. My doula was in the OR with me. All I could hear was my doula's voice in my head. She was taking pictures on my professional camera, taking video, narrating what was happening for me. And I left that experience grateful for a healthy baby, but almost feeling like more gutted than my first experience, which was like legitimately traumatic.
Mhm.
So I was thinking to myself, like, I don't know how I ever would have gone through that surgery if my doula wasn't there. And my husband was like, I don't know how I would have bunny suited up and been waiting outside without her keeping me comfortable. So we just like left that experience and we both were like, wow, doulas are amazing. And my way of coping with my two birth experiences, which might be the only two birth experiences I ever have, was to just dive head first into learning anything and everything about birth. I took classes. I listened to podcasts. I read books. I did all the research I should have done the first time I was pregnant. And it became like my special interest. So my daughter was born in 2021. And by December of 2023, I had completed a training through Doula. And a year later, I was fully certified. I had at that point gone through my first 4 births. And then 2025, I took on 11. And for 2026 now, I already have 13 and counting. And I've gone from a first-time mother with absolutely no desire to learn anything at all to my business thrives mainly on crunchier moms who are open to midwifery care, birth center, home birth, low intervention, less is more.
Mhm.
And I'm telling you right now, if the 2019 version of me in March, which is when my daughter was born, could look at the 2026 March version of me, like you would not even believe it.
Yeah. What of that experience led to you not breastfeeding your daughter?
Yeah, good question. So with my second daughter, I experienced really bad postpartum anxiety. Again, I think my body went into a total tailspin of all the fear and all the trauma from the first birth that I never released, that I never healed. It had nowhere to go. So my first time around, I have 0 postpartum care. I've gone through an extremely traumatizing experience. I'm in the NICU. I'm getting no sleep. My daughter's future is unknown at that point, but I had 0 postpartum mood issues whatsoever. Second time around, riddled with postpartum. I ended up having to seek therapy, use an SSRI for 6 months, which I had never done in my whole life. And I'm happy to say I used it as a tool and I got right off of it. But I was really in a bad place. And one of the first things that happened to me was when I tried to breastfeed her in the hospital postpartum, I was having really bad panic attacks because I couldn't see that she was getting the milk.
Mhm.
I couldn't see that she was okay. And I remember asking them to call the feeding therapist from the NICU down to the mother baby floor. And they said, well, we don't really do that. And I said, tell her my name. It was 2 years ago. She knows me. Tell her my name. And she came down and she helped me through the feeds. And she reassured me that I could breastfeed if I wanted to. And she fed my baby a bottle and I watched her feed my baby a bottle. I have it on video. And that was like everything I needed to say to myself, you're in a really bad way right now. And you have 2 little girls that you need to be okay for. So if that means that visualizing what this baby eats and being able to see it and count it and mark it down is going to help you release some of the trauma that you've experienced, then that's what you need to do. Was
You
telling
had
me.
years of learning you can't trust your body or your babies because something's going to break and not work. And so you needed to visualize something working. Yeah.
Exactly. And it was working. And I was like, this is what I'm going to do. And I'm working toward my hypnobirthing certification
Nice.
because I feel that birth is really 90% mental and 10% physical. And if your mind is carrying this fear, this feeling of being broken, this feeling of needing to outsource validation, outsource confirmation that everything's okay, if you can't find it in you when you're the one growing this baby, then you're not going to be able to fully relinquish and to fully have the experience that you not only want, but deserve as a woman.
Yeah. If you could doula yourself through those two experiences, what would you have suggested for support? Because I heard you saying that it's not good to have fear in the room. And sometimes when we say that, we're referring to her mother or, you know, somebody that she's inviting in. But it's another thing when the fear in the room is yourself, you know, somebody you can't just ask to leave.
Yeah, well, that's the mental and emotional prep, right? Somatic work, breath work, meditation, journaling, fear release, all of the things I never, ever thought I had to do. And it makes me so sad. Really just hope to reach a new generation of younger women. I was recently at an event where I was the old lady. I'm 38, and I was there with a bunch of 27, 28-year-old women who are either engaged or getting married or just got married, no children yet in the group, right? Me and my sister-in-law were the only one with children there. And they had started to ask me questions about my work. And I was like, oh, just this week I was at a beautiful home birth, first-time mom. Do you want to see pictures? Do you want to see videos? And the conversation just spiraled into like, if I could hire a surrogate someday, I would. I'm terrified to give birth. All we see on TikTok are horror stories, and we're just so afraid. And I'm thinking to myself, like, it's just getting worse. Like, we are conditioned to not trusting our body and to being fearful of birth and to try to outsource the validation. And I think that's the biggest thing that I would have taught myself, or that I would have doulaed myself on the first time around, would be, why do you keep going to these ultrasounds every week? I'm curious, if every week they check your fluid levels and they check on the baby and it stays the same after 2 or 3, why are we still going? Did you know that it's within your rights to say that you don't have to? Did you know that it's within your rights to not get induced? I think it would have benefited me so much to have a presence try to open up my line of sight so that I wasn't just seeing what everyone around me did. But like,
sometimes it can be too late in pregnancy almost. I feel like we need to talk to our girls, and
that's what I've been thinking about.
Like the health, what's it called? Health ed class or whatever, sex ed class. I think they call it health ed. It's like getting in the schools, and I'm going to plug a little bit somebody that I interviewed. I can't remember when her podcast will go out, but
I know who it is.
Yeah, Girls Who Know.
Love it.
Yeah. And so she's trying to get to girls before their cycles happen to talk about their cycles, and trying to get girls before they're intimate to talk about how to avoid an unnecessary or unwanted pregnancy, because they're interested in all these things. It's like how to talk to the preteen about the teenage years, because everyone wants to grow up so fast. I see things where it's like, okay, your son is 10, he's not driving. Teach him how to drive the tractor. Make him fascinated by it and keep him encouraged into the future. But that way you have this chance to mold and help them understand what it is before they're actually in it.
Like a bad experience. It's such a common story that someone has a traumatic birth story and then they learn everything they can about birth. And it's like, why do you have to have that bad first experience? Why is it not something that we've talked about? And then it's what we grow up seeing. Like, my mom had 3 C-sections, and that's just what I thought of birth. Like, it's like you go to the hospital and you might have a C-section, and that's just normal. And every outcome that's like that just breeds more outcomes like that, because that's just what we're teaching our kids, is the way you have babies. And it's not just like that one birth in a vacuum. It has this huge impact on everyone around you.
Yeah, I put together a video from the last home birth I was at, because she was a first-time mom, and the text on the video says, your first birth doesn't have to be a trial run. And that's exactly the sentiment, like, of what you were just saying. And I feel fortunate to be able to relay this stuff to my daughters in a way that feels safe and appropriate, but also to show them the options that are out there. At every birth I attend, when I come back, they ask me, was it a boy or a girl? What's the baby's name? And I'll make a point to say, do you think this baby was born at home or in the hospital? Where do you think this baby was born? So my daughters know already at 4 and 7 that there are lots of people out there that have their babies at home. And I've made it a point to explain to them that sometimes we go to the hospital, and Indy went to the hospital because Indy needed help after she was born, but you don't have to go to a hospital if you don't want to.
Yeah.
And that was something that, you know, to your point about girls who know and about teaching girls, you know, my mother, as I'm sure your mothers did, they did the best that they could with the information they had and with the culture at the time and with their own upbringing. But I know if I look back on my own lineage, that my mom's mom, if I could guess, knowing my late grandmother, likely didn't talk to my mom about any of this stuff. So then when it came time for it to be my turn, I feel that the discussion was probably pretty minimal, probably too minimal.
We have women who gave birth in twilight sleep where they couldn't even tell you the story if they wanted to. They didn't experience it, you know?
Yeah, and my grandmother had another baby, and no one knows what happened to the baby. Like, the baby didn't live very long, but we don't know.
Yeah. My mom had that same story. She's 5 girls, and then their youngest was a boy. Went to the hospital, came home with no baby, and nobody said anything.
Nobody said anything. Exactly. That's
exactly it wasn't stillbirth. It was just you don't talk about it.
Yep. I mean, it's just crazy to think about. And when that happens to a child and there's no explanation of where that baby went, they bring that into their own births then as adult women, probably, I would think. I listened to another podcast once where the episode was talking about all the different experiences in life, including how we were born and how they imprint. And it's like layers of a flaky pastry that like all the experiences we have imprint. And so who we are continues to evolve and change based on the experiences that we've had in our life, starting with our own birth. And I would imagine that even if, let's say my mom was 2 when this happened, I still think somehow her body and her soul probably registered that. And it became a part of a gigantic imprint of who she is. And I fully believe in all of that kind of like woo-woo side of things, now having gone through everything that I have been through personally.
Well, I love that you're a doula because I know for me personally, which we have very similar stories because my second was born by C-section too. When you were saying that the part of the healing for me is being able to pay it forward and take my experience and have a thing that I learned from it and be able to support other families. Like, for example, if you have a doula client whose baby ends up in the NICU, what a blessing for them that they hired you specifically who can help walk them through that experience. And I feel similar. Both of my babies were NICU babies. And if we have somebody whose baby ends up in the NICU, I'm like, okay, here's what we need to do. And they feel like they have a guide through the experience.
Totally. I couldn't agree more. I feel like at this point in my practice, I'm able to say that I've experienced almost the full breadth of anything that you could possibly experience, with the exception of an unmedicated home birth. And ironically, those are the ones that I support the most. But yeah, I experienced it all. And I feel really grateful in hindsight to have those lived experiences and to just see where it goes from here, because it is very much so fulfilling me. And I think, like you said, healing me in ways that no therapist, no SSRI, nothing could have healed me the way that birth work heals me. And sure, I have a pipe dream of someday having the home birth with twinkle lights. But if that never happens, genuinely, I feel that I have found a purpose in this space and I'm just loving it.
Yeah. I heard you say that you have a fancy camera. So are you also a photographer as well?
Yeah, I just
I
completed.
was also a photographer too.
Oh my God, we are like so the same. And I'll be honest with you, I don't want to jump the gun because my practice is relatively new. But the more I practice, the more I realize that I want to just get my CPM and go that route. And I think I'm just waiting for my girls to get a little bit older. But it sounds like you and I might have another Zoom call to get on or something so that I can have you mentor me a little bit and pick your brain on all this, because we do have really similar stories. And I don't know, what was the question?
I was just saying, do you also offer like birth photography?
Yes. Because I had mentioned in the beginning, I was doing influencer marketing work. I had this platform that I grew. I had been using a professional camera for 10 years. So I had the equipment. I was very seasoned at photographing product shots, ad campaigns, my own children. I said, why not bring it into the birth room? So I was self-taught. And then most recently, I received a birth photography certification from Birth Becomes You. So I'm an official certified birth photographer. But yes, I offer photography with every single doula package. And if for some reason there's someone that really strongly doesn't want their birth captured, then we can talk about other options. But I believe that it is a beautiful, tangible memory. And honestly, the pictures that my doula took on my camera from my C-section, which I then edited in my style, are the only photos I have from either of my births that feel like a memory that I want to like hold dear. Yeah. And so that's another thing that I'm like setting out to spread the word and to help these moms realize that sharing their birth stories and their birth photos, even though these are really intimate moments, has so much more power than just getting likes and clicks on Instagram. It's powerful. Like I said, at that event I went to where all the young girls are saying what they hear and see on TikTok terrifies them. It's equally so valuable to flood these timelines with positive, beautiful moments that we don't have to be afraid of, so that we can start chipping away at the collective fear that's just rumbling under the surface for all of our women and girls right now, it seems.
So important.
Yeah.
Well, before we close out, will you say contact info if anyone's wanting to get a hold of you? And we'll be sure to put it in the show notes.
Perfect. Yes. So you can reach me on Instagram. My doula page is The Sage Sister. It's the.sage.sister. I'm offering sage wisdom, sisterly kinship, and guidance to women all over New Jersey. I also offer virtuals. You can go to thesagesister.com. You can check me out there. And then for my more personal platform, it's just my name, Liz Eidelman. You can find that on Instagram as well. My inbox is always open if you're a VACTERL mom, esophageal atresia mom, a budding doula, if you're interested in birth work, or of course, if you need birth support. Send me a message.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. This was awesome.
Thanks for listening to the Born Wild podcast. Find us on Instagram or email bornwildpodcast@gmail.com. If this episode supported you, please share it and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. It'll help more families find us. This podcast is for education and storytelling only and is not medical or individualized health advice. And as always, stay wild.